Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Sky's the Limit, Optimizing Cloud Costs. I think we'll give it just a few more minutes for people to get logged in and join, and then we will get kick-started with some introductions. Maybe we will get started then. So my name is Heather Kovakus, and I head up the Central Government Program at techUK, and really pleased to be hosting this webinar today, and really pleased that we are joined by some really fantastic panelists. So I will hand it over firstly to Manish to introduce himself, and then if you can pass it on to Daniel and then our colleagues from ONS.
Thanks, Heather. Hello, everyone. I'm Manish Garg. I'm Managing Director at V3. We are a cloud and FinOps consultancy. And pleased to be here, and we'll be sharing our insights and more about the FinOps. And I'll hand over to Daniel then.
Thanks, Manish. I'm Daniel Benton, civil servant working as a lead technologist in the Central Digital and Data Office. I'm currently leading a project to aggregate and analyse power consumption right across the UK's public sector. And in a previous life, as a technology leader, I oversaw a programme of work which implemented a load of the principles that we'll be speaking about today. So I'm looking forward to getting stuck in. Let me hand over to Peter and Chris.
Good morning all, thank you for joining. So my name is Pete McKenzie-Baughan. I'm the Head of Cloud Services and Support here at the Office for National Statistics. I lead a team of DevSecOps engineers that are mobilising FinOps across our growing cloud estate. So thank you for the invite today.
Hi there, and my name is Chris Penner. I'm the Deputy Director of Cloud at ONS. I joined about 5 years ago to deliver the UK's 2021 digital census, which all of the front-facing services of that were delivered off of serverless cloud. A really, really impressive project, and then went on to enhance the use of cloud in ONS. So really good to be here. We've had quite a journey with this.
Great. So as you guys can all tell, we are joined by some really, really clever people who know their stuff. So I think it's probably good to kick off our session today by trying to understand what FinOps is exactly. So I'll ask Manish to give us a little bit of context and some background. Manish?
Sure. So let me share my screen. I've got a small presentation just to talk about, FinOps. And just to sort of give a background, as I mentioned, so we are a company which has many years of cloud implementation, and with those cloud implementation, we've learned in terms of how to optimize, what are the best practices, what the FinOps is about, and this is what we are going to share. So please to sort of sponsor and work with techUK on this topic, which is quite close to myself. So let me just move to the next slide. 1 second. So as we all know, and as we know from our other panelists, the cloud is a necessity now, and cloud is growing, and everybody needs clouds, and more workloads have moved to the cloud. And one of the Gartner's figures in that is that sort of cloud spending will reach to 671.5 billion in 2024. Quite a big sum of money. But with that sort of moving to the cloud, there is also a lot of cost. And in today's economic environments, we need to look at how we can manage those costs, how we can get the best of both. And that's where the FinOps would come in. And traditional sort of cost management really struggle in terms of looking at the nature of the dynamic nature of the cloud and how to manage those aspects. So, and that's where the FinOps comes in, and which we say it's a key to sort of cost optimization. That's a sort of natural kind of instinct when we start looking at the big sort of the cloud implementation transformations. So FinOps in a nutshell is a cultural shift, which is about the bringing financial accountability and sort of promoting collaborations between business, finance, and technology teams. It sort of works out as a one team, not just as a siloed teams, like the technology team is siloed or finance team or business team. It's about sort of having one team and sharing that accountability, sharing that sort of transparency and ongoing involvement. And it's an ongoing sort of process. It's not just one step, one stop process. You sort of keep iterating, keep looking at better ways to optimize, better way to get the efficiency and improving the value. And it helps organizations in terms of the data-driven decisions. Moving on, so what we gain in sort of the four key things that we get out of the FinOps is reduce cloud spending without sacrificing the performance. It's about getting the best value out and ensuring that we pay only what we need. So not doing over provisioning, not doing sort of under provisioning, not having the idle resources, these kind of things. And then extracting the most value from the cloud investment. And then ensuring clear cost visibility and accountability. These are the sort of four key things, is to making sure that whatever projects that we have is true to sort of its implementation, get the best value and better outcomes. And how do we implement FinOps? Whenever we work with clients, whether with the public sector or the private sector, we look at the three-step process in a simplest view, is to define and prioritize the business value that you aim to get from the cloud. And then once we have defined those and prioritize those business values, then we create metrics to measure each of those value area. And then once we have sort of measured, then we sort of continuously track and reevaluate those, the cloud business value realization. That is the sort of simple 3 key step process to implement FinOps. And what are the key principles with the FinOps is the collaborations. So as I mentioned, Salah team, we really need to sort of more collaboration because that's when we get the best value out. Business value driven decisions. So the business values, all the decision needs to be derived from the business value, aligned with the cloud investments and goals. And it's a shared ownership. So each team, each project, each department may have different cloud. Each of them needs to have their own responsibility. And then sort of all the decisions are based on the data and providing timely data and accessible data, which allows the informed decision making. And then having the sort of center of excellence or centralized FinOps team, which provides leadership and guidance, and leveraging cloud's model, which is about the dynamic nature, using services, what we need to use, and paying for only for those services. And this is a sort of 6-step process that we worked out in terms of the achieving the full implementation of FinOps. At a high level, these are the steps which we start with understanding cloud uses and its cost. Then we start utilizing, each of the public cloud has their own cost management tools, understanding them, using them, and then allocating budget and then tracking costs using those tools. So this is about setting up, setting up things, and then we look at optimizing cloud pricing, which are the ways, what are the savings plan, what are the commitment-based plans, and then we look at sort of how we can enhance our efficiency, which are the services that we need to use, which services we should remodel or not model, and then ultimately align with the organization goals or business values. This is sort of the template that we use. And just at a very high level, we have worked out a full sort of operating model to implement across FinOps. I'm not going to sort of talk about, there's a lot of details on this slide, but we wanted to show this to give you, how we can leverage all of these aspects and look at the various ways that we can implement the FinOps. And so how do we, where do we go from here? So we start with FinOps by conducting a cloud cost assessment. So defining a baseline and then sort of defining the cost allocation models, determining how, which ways the cloud costs are distributed and which departments, then sort of implementing cloud tagging and sort of resource identification, which will help us sort of, categorize resources and sort of allocate and then sort of build our matrices. And then we identify the cost optimization opportunities. That's where we leverage FinOps framework, the one that we showed, and there are various others. And then obviously there's a great body of work in terms of the best practices from FinOps Foundation. We work a lot with them, and to sort of utilize the sort of a lot of latest trends, latest stuff is happening. And I think that brings to the end of my slide. So this is just to finally just take away. Is the final message is aligning your cloud spending with your business goals, measuring your progress, and then adopting a strategy for continuous optimization. That is the essence of FinOps. And I'll hand over to the panel from here onwards. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Manish. That's really helpful to have that context and to have that baseline understanding of what FinOps is. And it seems to me to be a really a good way to optimize and to take into considerations your actual usage and price and all of that good stuff. So it's all about increasing efficiency, which is really important in public sector and actually in any organization. I'm thinking, geez, in my own home, am I optimizing things? So it's sort of good to have that baseline. Maybe I'll turn to Peter and Chris for my first question around sort of what are the common issues that you find with optimizing cloud usage at ONS?
Thanks, Heather. So I think some of the common challenges that we are learning more about, I wouldn't say they are fully solved, is around tagging and labeling of resources. So here at ONS, we've got quite an expansive cloud estate split across multiple cloud vendors, and finding a consistent way to allocate individual cloud things to particular departments or divisions, as we call them here at ONS, is a common challenge. Other areas that we're finding interesting, I think it's safe to say, is the data cleansing involved in that as well. So different cloud vendors have got different ways and approaches in which they tag or label cloud resources, right from a kind of a virtual machine, as an example, through to, say, a Kubernetes cluster or even a network, a virtual private cloud network. So each vendor has got their own ways of approaching kind of the metadata management, as we call it, around these resources. So those are two key challenges that we found quite early on in our journey to FinOps.
And I had a third sort of slightly overarching one, which is we have quite, I mean, as every government department, as every business, which isn't freshly minted, has a bit of legacy, both cloud and estate legacy. And building legacy replacement that's native to cloud is actually really difficult and quite expensive. So we found that change of fixing something that isn't broken quite a difficult argument to have with our business colleagues, because it's outside of the funding cycle for a refresh. It's just not an easy thing to do. So we're always having that tension within our organization around that reduced legacy, but at the same time try not to cost more, and how much do you sweat your assets. So that's a bit of a tension that we work with pretty much daily.
Thanks. I see. Oh, sorry. Daniel, are you still there?
I think he was there.
Oh, he was there. Oh,
Yeah.
anyways, we'll wait for him to pop back up on the screen. Maybe we move on to another question here. So maybe you guys can talk us through some of the benefits that we can achieve through FinOps. I know, Manish, you talked about some of it in your presentation, but would be good to sort of maybe. Oh, Daniel is back. Daniel, welcome back. Thanks. I saw you were nodding in agreement with what Chris and Peter said, and I wanted to know if you had anything to add around some of the challenges that you had with optimizing cloud.
Yeah, it's my moment to shine, and the tech started to fail me, so it's a nice heart attack moment there. Yeah, I think I certainly identify a load of all of the points that Pete and Chris made, and I think that I just append that what we're talking about with implementing some of these principles is really bringing a cultural change, and we shouldn't underestimate that can be difficult. We're breaking down silos, we're trying to encourage collaboration across teams, and in small organizations like my previous org, or the civil service, or larger orgs, that we shouldn't underestimate how difficult that can be. So I'm sure throughout the talk we'll focus on some of the strategies to try and get through some of those challenges, but I definitely just try and focus on the value, bring people along for the journey, and focus on what's in it for them as well. As we break down the different silos.
Cool, thank you. So maybe you wanna, I'll stick with you for a minute there, Daniel. maybe talk us through some of the benefits that you found that you've been able to achieve through FinOps.
Sure. I think the improved decision making, we have workloads that perhaps enthusiastic architects have moved to the cloud a number of years ago. We maybe were running large programs of running different workloads to the cloud now. And I think that getting the actual data or the state of what is our cloud exposure and utilization right now enables leaders to actually make accurate decisions rather than just sort of gut feeling decisions around what programs are working, what services are actually being utilized. So it's really important. I think on a cultural point as well, you are enhancing the sort of financial accountability. So that's a good and a bad thing. I think that you're sort of shining a light on the areas that perhaps are in the dark before, but then sharing that kind of responsibility for the actual spend. And to Pete and Chris's point earlier, that's where tagging is super important, so you can actually do that accurately. And then ultimately, the hope, probably the reason that a lot of people joined this call is around cost efficiency. And in my previous organization, when I implemented a load of what then became FinOps principles, it was more from a risk exposure perspective. I needed to just see like what's out there and what's potentially not secure. But just by shining a light on the environments, an example would be the data science team in my organization managed to reduce their cloud footprint by 60%. And that was just by shining a light on what they're actually using. So those kind of top level savings could be there before you do some of the more fancy kind of processes.
Amazing. Thanks. Maybe we will turn to Chris and Peter. Anything you guys want to add about some of the benefits that you've been able to achieve through FinOps?
Absolutely. So yeah, touching on what Daniel was speaking about there, the shared responsibility model is crucially important for us here at ONS. So by identifying what we're calling key customers, or kind of the big spenders across our internal cloud consumers, we've been able to engage with them directly, kind of on the cultural strand of our approach in FinOps, and kind of ask the question, could we, consult with you in doing something about this? So some of the successes that we've found are cloud customers of ours, internal customers who historically have been on a very, very steep learning curve. They've been able to actually define patterns of how other teams can evolve FinOps cost savings. One internal customer in particular, as a result of those kind of cultural conversations and talking about the shared accountability and shared responsibility model, was able to define a pattern as to how to turn off specific instances, quite complex ones, in fact, that are not sort of out of the box able to do it overnight and at the weekend, offering up to a 60%, 70% cost saving of a very substantial key customer project. The shared responsibility model that Daniel was talking about as well allows us to further develop that FinOps pattern catalog that we centralize, and we say, hey, if you're using this same technology, whether it be on a particular vendor cloud, have a look at this database of successes that our teams have discovered, something you can gain from that. See if you can look at that pattern catalog and see if that would work for your project as well. So there's some real kind of cultural successes that we're starting to see. We're very much on the in between crawling and walking, I think, on the FinOps Foundation kind of model of maturity. But with that, we've seen the conversation starting, which is really, really crucial at a delivery team level with the delivery managers. Let's start thinking about this, which is often the biggest challenge. Chris, would you have anything?
Well, what's also helped is over the last maybe year and a half, efficiencies in government have taken a real front seat, and I'm sure Daniel will have seen a lot of this. And one of the things that we were doing, and still to some extent are doing, is our cloud budget is covered centrally in the organization and not pushed out to the people who are actually the consumers. And they were, to them, what they were spending on the cloud was pretty much invisible, because the strategy was to get things onto cloud and reduce our physical estate. And over the last 18 months, we've taken okay, that's all good, but now we need to make it efficient. And so the work Pete's done and his team in putting together visible dashboards and ways to say, here's how much it costs, even if you're not paying, here's how much you're costing, has been really useful in driving behavior. And there's a slight view that maybe one day we'll actually directly pass those costs on to the business units that are consuming them. We're not quite there yet. And because that's sort of floating around, it's helped push the needle a little bit to, okay, we will spend time in a sprint fixing some code, which is a little bit verbose and costing a lot in processing when it doesn't need to. And that elegance of code, time to develop elegant code, is worth spending if you know that there's a cost that's there's one way or another going to benefit you and your team. Although there's a slight challenge to that we're also facing, which is we're sort of pushing towards more citizen development, where we get more of our organization to come up with good ideas and implement them either in automation or in our data science campus. And they're not as well trained as a direct coder. So they're slightly less likely to come up with code which isn't going to cost a lot, but we really want them to do the work because it's really valuable work. So we need to sort of keep that goodness there somehow as well.
Sounds like lots of different elements to weigh up. And I think that sort of cultural aspect of it is really key. Sometimes that's even harder than the tech bit of it. It's sort of bringing the people along and having them join the vision and the bigger picture of what you're trying to achieve, especially if they're not owning the cost, but are contributing to it. So really pleased to hear about what's happening at ONS and the successes that you guys have made. Maybe I'll turn to Manish for my next question. When it comes to the best practices for forecasting and budgeting cloud expenses, what would you say are some examples you can point to of best practice?
Yeah, sure. So before I sort of answer sort of forecasting and budgeting, I just wanted to touch upon, I think both Daniel, Chris, and Peter have touched upon, is the data is the key, is to having that sort of tagging and the sort of allocating the cost to those sort of tags and identifying costs based on those tags. So that's one of the key and one of the key problem area for our clients. So whenever we work, we sort of have a sort of platform which integrates with all the cloud providers and provides that view in a sort of consolidated, which really helps then inform the conversation, right? Because as it's a cultural issue, it's to having those difficult conversations with internal teams more than the external teams. That's where those data points are really key. And that's where it leads up to the forecasting as well. Because the better tags that you have, and you can do the better allocation, and then you can do the better forecasting. And knowing which sort of tags are, contributing to which cost. And that sort of leads up to the, your forecasting model, and then leads up to your sort of matrices. So usually when we start with the forecasting, most of the time, and if you are new to the cloud, you start with a very simple sort of forecast. Okay, this spending is this month, and next month it will be that spending. So this is a very simple level of forecasting. And then once you sort of, get a bit matured, and then you get to the forecasting is, you look at the historical. Okay, I've been spending about 100K per month from last 6 months. Now there's an increase of about 10%. So that's where it sort of forecasting moves. And then really sort of it's the sort of ultimate way to sort of look at is how much we're adding to the cloud in a sort of net new workloads on a sort of, let's say, monthly or any specific period basis, which then drives the communicate or sort of, let's say, conversations, and then derive the decisions, from there onwards. Okay, this is the new project is coming. This is going to add this much of, the resources, this much of the cost. And we need to have this conversion. We need to apply these best practices. Really, the forecasting, investing, you look at sort of the granularity, look at the, the frequency, look at the period, and then you look at the sort of the matrices on top of that. And key to all of this is the tagging and the data. And you have to cover your full state of your cloud to have the full view of your tag, and then the the cost, and then the forecasting along with that. And without that, if there are sort of gaps in that, that's where the leakage would happens, and that's where it becomes very important. So yeah, I think just say that you need to start moving gradually to the forecasting model. If you are new, start with the basic and then start with the trend and the net new workload basis.
Great, thank you so much for that. Just returning a little bit to this idea of the cultural change that's needed. So, what sort of tips do you have around how to make that cultural shift, and how do you encourage that change to improve the uptake of FinOps and FinOps principles? Uh, Daniel, maybe any tips from you on how you've been able to successfully do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's about bringing visibility to the initiative. So you'll have internal communication channels that you should be utilizing, whether that's Slack or relevant Slack channels. You should be creating relevant documentation and guidance so people understand what's happening, or if there are actions for people to take, that they know exactly what to do. And ultimately try and get people in the room, run a workshop, get people involved, crowdsource ideas. A lot's been said about the sort of shared responsibility model here. We are trying to pool that responsibility, so it's only fair that when we're bringing an initiative like this to the table, that people feel a part of it, and that they've got some skin in the game, as it were. Those are kind of different sort of techniques or things that I found have worked quite well in the past.
Chris or Peter, any things that you guys have done in addition to that?
I'd add senior management championship. Just someone to drive it is really helpful. So my boss, for instance, is super keen, and so is his boss. So there's quite a push from that level, and that helps corral groups who need to make some quite tricky delivery choices over whether they tidy up some aspect of their code and cost a bit more, or whether they don't and deliver more functionality. So we're always playing trade-offs. So getting that senior level buy-in is really helpful. Getting it added to your digital strategy is also really helpful because that helps with that particular conversation. So we have the data in this year. And the other bit I'd add is, as everything gets more observable, we get better and better data. And with that really good data, we can start attributing costs and benefits to the people who are doing this work. And that gives it's not quite it's sort of monthly is our cadence of reporting, but we can get some pretty, not up to the minute, but up to the month, reports out and data out saying this is where you are. And that's been really helpful in pushing people in the right direction and getting them to take this a bit more seriously.
And what about something like just highlighting your wins and sort of publicizing where it has gone right and sharing the good news stories? Have you found that that's been a helpful way to sort of bring people on board as well?
Absolutely. So in the public sector, we use communities of practice as a good way of bringing certain demographies of role together to talk about common themes, common challenges for a particular role, whether this be a delivery manager or a software engineer or an infrastructure engineer. And we've spoken with the communities and we started kind of engaging with them from a kind of show and tell perspective to say, these are the types of successes we're seeing as a result of engaging with those key customers, the high spenders. And that kind of sows the seed of interest around the wider community. Picking up on something that Daniel mentioned at the beginning of the conversation around, what's in it for me is often a big cultural challenge that individuals might find, So we're engaging with them from a community of practice point of view on an ongoing basis, supported by, as Chris was mentioning, the strategy, the digital strategy for the organisation. We've also found that the dashboards we've been piloting and distributing to our kind of internal customers have really, again, started that conversation and started that, do we really need this? It's quite an active conversation within the delivery teams as well. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Manish, any tips from you on how to get that cultural change going?
Yeah, I think Peter and Daniel have touched upon it. So sort of building that catalog. I think Peter mentioned previously is having those sort of catalog of the templates and which has been used, has been sort of applied in the past, and that sort of really helps the teams to start with the best practices that this has been worked best in the past, and with this kind of technology, with this kind the with this uses this cost, and why don't we start with this? And it's sort of sharing that information. And as I touched upon in my sort of presentation, is sometimes there are ideas which comes out of the FinOps team, and that's where the technology teams has ideas which they could remodel a project. Sometimes they start with a technology which probably is not the right technology, and then they learn about best practices, and then they come back with a new sort of technology. And this is a lot happens with the lot of now AI and ML sort of kind of scenarios where it is happening. It's a new technology. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and a lot of different ways to sort of minimize the cost, because there's a lot of cost with the AI and AML, ML workloads, and how to best ways to do. It's about sharing, and it's about having that sort of platform, having that sort of approach, so that they can sort of the come back to you and sort of share new architecture, new technology practices. And there's a sort of what we have done is that wherever we've learned from other clients, and we were able to share with our new clients or other clients as a form of best practices, that okay, this is worked with this public cloud, this is this kind of commitment base, or this kind of the architecture has worked, and which came into this cost, we can leverage this. So it helps, because we as a consultancy, we are able to share a lot more in form of best practices.
Yeah, I suppose you're at an advantage in as much as you've seen it from lots of different customers' points of views, and you can sort of introduce some new ideas that maybe hadn't been seen in a particular organization. So yeah, that's a really good key point you brought in there. I wanted to pick up on something that you
Heather,
said around sort of. Oh, sorry, go
Sorry, I
ahead,
was just going to just pick up on a quick point I think Pete raised. I think sometimes it can be difficult to kind of celebrate the wins, because we're in a world of trying to move things forward incrementally, i.e. In a really small way. So sometimes the lens that we're working and looking through is so sort of granular that the tiny wins don't really add up to much. But sorry, the tiny wins don't seem like much, but they do add up to something. So I think it's about taking a step back sometimes and seeing that sort of wider progress, even though we're working in these ever tighter kind of feedback loops.
Yeah, no, that's important. I think definitely, taking that step back to get that perspective and say, actually, we've done some really important things here. We've done some really good work. It's really key, and it helps to sort of drive the motivation to keep doing it and keep at it and keep making those sort of small wins that to build up. So no, that's really key. Just I wanted to pick up on something Manish had said around sort of AI, and I wanted to ask, what role does automation play in FinOps, and what tools are really effective in driving that?
Yeah, sure. You're asking me, Heather? Not sure if you
Yes, I
asked.
was going to
Okay.
start with you, but
Well,
we'll
sure.
pass
Well,
it
I
on to
think
the
the
rest of the
automation
panel.
is key, and I think what one of the word that Chris used, observability, right? As more and more things, that's about automation. That's getting data automatically out of the resources, out of the services that we are using, and automatically feeding into the overall sort of dashboard, overall sort of data analysis, and that sort of comes out from the automation. There are a lot of tools which can be, there's a native cloud tools, and with all the public clouds, and then there's an additional tools, whether it's open source or sort of the paid ones, which can be implemented, which give you all of the the data insights. And other is the sort of the automation is key in terms of having this DevOps culture, or having this infrastructure as a code culture, which also allows to build you templates, build you catalog, because you have developed something as an infrastructure or code, you can apply to other projects, and those allow you to sort of control, in terms of what services are being called. All of these are get recorded in a templates. So, and sort of improve the agility as well. So when I say look at FinOps, beyond the sort of the cost, I see three other benefits, right? One is the improving the agility, improving the compliance. By way of having the data, it's actually improves the compliance, which department using which services, what kind of data they are using in terms of the data workload or data storage. And that sort of drives conversation and shows sort of more of a compliance, more visibility, and overall it reduces the risk from that perspective. So I would say the automation is key, and most of the work when we sort of change the architecture, change the technology to have the better sort of value, that actually driven by the automation, driven by the the DevOps and other areas, whether it's serverless or whether it's other areas, it's driven by that.
Thanks. Daniel or Chris or Peter, any thoughts on the role of automation and other tools actually?
I would
Absolutely, yeah.
I'd just say that Manish probably covered off most of the points here. I think that just what I would say is that if you're at the start of trying to implement some of these FinOps principles, like just kind of get going, document that process of what you're doing, and then at each point think there will be a way to automate that step, which is what you'll probably want to do later once you've actually got some useful data. So yeah, I would just say just keep it in the back of your mind. I completely agree with Manish that it's completely key that you want all of this stuff to tick over in the background automatically. So.
Peter?
Yeah, I'd support everything that Manish and Daniel have said there, especially around kind of focusing on what could be kind of automated by looking at the whole life cycle of the cloud project as an example. So it seems to Manish you touched on governance there as well, which has got a very close coupling and interrelationship with FinOps in a number of ways. For example, here at ONS, we have very, very strict compliance requirements alongside the data handling sensitivities that we have here, common both public and private sector, in order to tackle that challenge alongside FinOps as well, is ensure that we implement a whole life cycle management piece for our cloud customers that includes metadata around the cloud, who owns it, who is responsible for it, who knows most about it, who is financially accountable, who is accountable from a security perspective or a data security perspective. And what we do is we label and we tag all of this metadata around cloud projects and then take it through the journey of, can we automate this? Can we make the life cycle management of these cloud projects easier and less manually labor intensive? There's something to be said on what we've learned by using good old Microsoft Excel in our journey on FinOps so far to aggregate the data from these locations and pivot tabling this information so we can see how can we render this in a dashboard? How can we get what we've gotten to this point manually using Excel in a format that's going to be consumable for our customers? So I think from an automation perspective, it's key to have a view of the whole life cycle of a project really, and how FinOps fits within that. In addition, again, touching on something that both Daniel and Manish have talked about, which is infrastructure as code. So here at ONS, one of our edicts, our themes is that all of our governance of cloud project accounts is configured using code. For example, tools such as Terraform. Yeah. And what Terraform allows us to do is create, and I love this analogy, create a recipe for a particular cloud project account. But within that recipe, you've got these fields that you can populate. So you can say, what's the cost code for this particular project? Who is accountable for it? And we put all these in the recipe that Terraform gives us, and we deploy to cloud using that methodology. Because of our journey, as Chris mentioned, through Census as well, Census 2021, we evolved that practice as part of our DevSecOps principles, and that's allowed us to embed FinOps tagging and labeling in a very well structured way. So I think, yeah, automation is key, especially at scale.
Great, thanks so much. Sort of looking ahead and looking forward now, what do you think are some of the latest trends in cloud optimization, and how can organizations stay ahead of those trends? Maybe I start with Manish.
Yeah,
Any
sure.
thoughts on the trends? Yeah.
Yeah, sure. So one thing, I think one sort of beautiful point that Peter touched upon. So DevOps and FinOps. Really, I think people get confused with the FinOps as a word. They think about something to do with the financials operations, but it's more like DevOps. It's both DevOps and FinOps are a culture. And if you implement DevOps as a culture, you would be able to implement FinOps as a culture, and they go both hand in hand together. So, and which I'm just explaining that because just from automation, that's a natural way to look at things, look at methodology. Now, coming about the trends and overall. So, one of the things that I've in the last couple of years is about sort of data workloads, which has moved more and more to the cloud, and is to look at the efficiency of data workload and this storage efficiency on the data workloads. That's one of the key trend a lot of our clients as they move, and this is one of the key because then you build your AI and ML model on top of that. So the efficiency of data storage in terms of the latest trend, if you look at how the FinOps is being applied, and then sort of looking at the cost optimization for AI and ML workload, which I mentioned previously, is to what are the ways. It's a very new technology. There's a lot of people don't know which services to use. Most of the public cloud have sort of rolled out multiple services, which sort of creates confusion in terms of which one to use, which is cost and what. There's about 10 or 5 different services for each of the public cloud. And then the third is this multi-cloud and hybrid cloud strategy, where you move stuff into different different public cloud depending on which has better technology, better use case fit for your own context, and you choose and you sort of align with that. You look at that overall view, not just the one sort of cloud view, and you look at which are the systems that you might still keep it, which may not be beneficial to move to the cloud. So looking at the sort of the hybrid and multi-cloud perspective. So I would say data efficiency, data workload efficiency, AI and ML workload cost optimization, and multi-cloud and hybrid cloud are the 3 sort of trends, I would say.
Great. I see Daniel nodding in agreement. Anything else you wanted to sort of add on some of the trends?
No, it's all good stuff there. And I think maybe not a latest trend, but just to shout out serverless architectures. I think if people are in the beginning of their cloud journey or still have a load of legacy infrastructure that looks to move over, it's just a shout out looking at re-architecting that or looking for the opportunities to re-architect for serverless architectures. That will probably typically lead to cost savings down the line. So just a shout out to that. I think in terms of trends, sustainability and green cloud are very much a thing that's happening now. And I've got a top tip here for people to take away, that if we're looking to shape some behavior or to drive through some changes with cloud consumption, if you just go to whether it's a developer or an architect and say, this is the cost saving or the bottom line saving for the business, perhaps they'll make the changes or prioritize them. But there's studies, and I'll see if I can find these to circulate, that show if you can include some sustainability metrics around the carbon saving and the kind of green credentials of making these changes, developers and architects are much more likely to make the changes. So just there's a top tip there for people to take away. And I think that any webinar in 2024 that doesn't mention AI and machine learning, I will burst that bubble. I think we're seeing AI and machine learning being implemented into things like cost anomaly detection, and a definite call to action for everyone on the call to be proactive in setting up your cost anomaly detection services across your cloud providers. You might unearth some savings or just some things that really shouldn't be happening. So it's just a tip there.
Oh, that's really good. Really surprised to hear about that study, and really interesting that people are very much driven by their values around sustainability more so than financial costs. That's really interesting. Chris or Peter, any other trends that you've spotted that you think are worth bringing up?
Absolutely. So there is a recent development in the realm of FinOps Foundation, which, as Manish and Daniel have both spoken about, may go some way to solve our data wrangling challenges when working with multiple vendors, which is called focus. So the FinOps Foundation working together with the major cloud providers to introduce a standardization of how billing data is presented from each of the vendors, really. Now, evidently, this will go a large way towards making sure that when, especially across, as Manish mentioned, hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, focus and the initiative around that from FinOps Foundation will prevent the need to cleanse or maybe reaggregate or sort that data once it comes into your centralized reporting tool. So we're all really excited within the DevSecOps teams around what that might mean. Of course, the tooling that we're already using at the moment may need a small amount of refactoring to accommodate that. But yeah, that's an exciting trend that we're starting to see. As Daniel mentioned, GreenOps. I mean, FinOps is driving towards the very kind of same essential kind of cultural paradigm shift as how we think about things in terms of use of IT and serverless and non-monolithic based architectures. Microservice architecture is absolutely essential, as well as from a cost saving perspective, but also from an efficiency and a carbon footprint perspective. So yeah, those are the themes that we're kind of seeing come about.
And on a sort of more strategic level, I think there's pricing how much something is going to cost when you move it to the cloud or build it in the cloud is still a massively dark art. I don't know whether you'd all agree with that, but it is the range of potential prices when you're moving something in the cloud. It really is, it's kind of hold onto your hats time sometimes. Just what is my exposure here? And you just don't know. And I think that I can see that the cloud providers are getting increasing pressure from people like me who are just scared to use their kit because you just don't know what kind of exposure you're letting yourself in for. On some projects are getting better at helping us understand how much something's going to cost in cloud, which then helps the FinOps side of things because you can start working out what the predictive elements are. But that is definitely missing from the equation at the moment. It's better than it was 5 years ago, but it's still pretty chunky, I'd say.
Okay, good to know. Good to know. So more clarity from suppliers around potential costs is helpful. Good, thanks. I just have a one more question before we start to sort of wrap up our conversation today. So when we think about costs, actually, how would you handle unexpected spikes in the cloud costs, and what strategies can mitigate that? So I guess you sort of touched a little bit on it, Chris, about on the start, what kind of costs we can expect, but what happens when you're sort of in the middle and there's some cost spike and what you can do to sort of mitigate some of that?
From our end, this happens quite often, and because Pete's team does such a good job in collecting data on the areas of the cloud and who's using it, one of our key bits of metadata is who's responsible. And so the first thing that happens in a cost spike is a phone call to whoever's responsible going, what's up? And often there's a very good, but that's sort of the starting pretend is if you, and it sounds trivial, but actually took quite a lot of work to get to that.
Yeah. That's key, kind of finding out what's driving it and where it's coming from. Daniel, any other thoughts?
It's a callback to something that's been mentioned a couple of times. Tagging. Like we have to Chris's point there, like just in that initial moment where it's all happening, alerts are going off left, right, and center. You need a really clear way of seeing this is the person that should be contacted that can give some insight or potentially stop this sort of spike in happening. And then just a callback to my previous answer around cost anomaly monitoring, just get ahead of that. All the hyperscalers offer different services and kind of techniques to stay on top of anomalies. Just put the effort in to set it up would be my advice.
Yeah, good point, actually. Manish, any thoughts on that?
Well, no, just to add on, I think anomaly is an interesting area. So And when we do all of this in terms of the tagging and defining all of that, there's just on top of that when we work with clients is defining sort of operating procedure or SOP, that what happens when you get a sort of the anomaly, what immediately step is, what data you collect, where do you go to, and who would take which action, which forum, what is the escalation route, what is the root cause analysis, what is the follow-up. Just defining an SOP will put that into practice, and every team would know how to approach it when the anomaly happens. So it's sort of anomaly management will sort of complete the picture in terms of, and sort of provide the best practice in terms of ongoing management, because anomaly could happen anytime. Even if we do it now, it could happen at any time. It's just to have that repeat process.
Chris.
Over to Pete.
Absolutely. I mean, one of the things that we're learning alongside our development teams, alongside our product managers, is the value of training and kind of being aware as to within cloud, because as Chris mentioned, we're in a very new realm in terms of consuming these services. What could, from a data organization perspective, which ONS is, what could be a very expensive query to run in cloud versus, say, a relatively efficient query within maybe a Cloud SQL instance, as an example. And there could be massive cost deviations between, the equivalent of index equals star on cloud versus a very efficient, well-targeted data query. So what we're trying to do is promote, together with our partners and our technical account managers, the real value of training, unexpected costs before they happen. And we're seeing some real successes there, which is absolutely fantastic news. So I will say advocacy and training are really key in terms of mitigating unforeseen cloud costs.
Yeah, that's actually a very good point. Sort of bringing everyone up to speed on what they need to know to sort of get ahead of the challenge and the cost spike. I'm just going to pause now to see if we have any questions from the people that have joined us. Anybody want to ask any questions or raise any comments? I think the Q&A function is what we will turn to for this, but I don't see any questions in there. Okay, that's fine. I think we are sort of drawing to the end of our webinar now, and I will just maybe invite each of our panelists to give their final thoughts on any sort of what are your key takeaways that you'd want the audience to leave with from our discussion today. And I'll start with Daniel, and then we'll go to Chris and Peter, and then end with Manish, I think. So Daniel, any sort of key highlights and takeaways?
Cool. I'll just rattle through a three here. So as I said, be proactive in setting up cost anomaly monitoring. I think it's super important. And I think the principles that we're talking about here, like integrate them early and often, like start now. The Chinese proverb is that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Like just get going and iterate from this point forward. And to that point, just know that with the cloud providers, if you already have workloads in the cloud, you can actually, you're not starting from a blank slate, so you can generate your previous 12 months of usage data via a support call. So just know that, and good luck.
Great, thanks.
And then for me, I'd say bringing it together around business benefit and making that business benefit aspect enormously clear, because everything that we ask within FinOps is going to be a trade-off. So there's always a trade-off on do some better coding now so that it doesn't cost as much, but lose a little bit of functionality later, but then you'll have the money to do that versus just sort of push for functionality. And often within any dev team I've ever worked in, it's sort of functionality first, and being a Boy Scout and really a really responsible citizen slightly second. So just getting that business benefit aspect in there to drive that.
I would say speak to the working teams. I would speak to the developers. I would speak to the engineers, the architects, the product managers, and kind of ask them: is this something you thought about? Do do you have any ideas on this front? Because I think engaging early with those stakeholders who essentially are going to be actioning those actionable insights that hopefully dashboarding and centralization of that information will give them, and allowing them to drive the conversation and understand what they ask early on is absolutely crucial. That would be my top tip.
Thank you. Manish?
Cool. So I would say that sort of embrace FinOps. And when I say embrace FinOps is aligning your cloud spending with business goals. That is super important as a sort of foundational principle, and it's to aligning everything with the business values, business benefit, and then sort of implementing tagging a lot, and sort of adopting the strategy in terms of the automation, in terms of having more cloud native technology rather than migrating to cloud, and having sort of multi-cloud and hybrid cloud sort of as options. And then lastly, as we touched upon, is to having sort of, prioritizing sustainability. I think these are the sort of 4 key points that I would mention as a takeaway from this.
Thank you so much. I think that's really been quite informative, and I've learned a lot. I'll tell you, I was quite green to the space and not know much about FinOps before I joined, and I'm a convert. I'm all in now, so that's been really helpful and really useful. And I think some of the key takeaways I've come away with is the conversations around that, the importance of cultural change and bringing the team on board with you as you make the change, the importance of everyone sort of feeling included in being a part of adding to the whole, and those incremental wins all adding up, and really the drive around sustainability as well was I hope you do share that article with us, Daniel, because that's really interesting, and that sounds like a really, really great and important. So I think as we draw this webinar to a close, I really want to thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing their insights. It's been really quite informative and quite a good session. Like I said, I've learned a lot. So Daniel, Peter, Chris, Manish, thank you so much for attending, for sharing your knowledge, and for giving us really all of the benefits and challenges and opportunities really that FinOps provides. So, and then also, of course, thanks to those who joined us live, and those who will be seeing this on clips later on social media. So thank you for joining us and participating, and to Manish and VE3 for sponsoring this webinar. So thanks everybody, and have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks everyone. Thanks. Take care.
Cool.
Cheers. Bye.